departmental areas. We will question how the ministers balance short-term pressures with long-going planning, how the decisions are aligned with common strategic policy, and what are the risks and obviously outcomes and measures. But before we'll go into the questions, let's do introduction. Deputy Ina Gardiner, President of Scrutiny Liaison Committee and Chair of the Common Strategic Review Policy Panel.
Deputy Helen Miles, Vice Chair of the Scrutiny Liaison Committee and Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Louise Dublé, I'm Chair of the Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel.
I'm Deputy Catherine Curtis, I'm Chair of Children Education and Home Affairs.
Deputy Alex Curtis, Member of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Panel.
Deputy Steve Luce, I'm Minister for...
The Deputy.
Oh, sorry, apologies, Monty.
Deputy Montfort Tanya, I'm Chair of the Economic International Affairs Scrutiny Panel. Thanks for allowing me to join online today.
Deputy Steve Luce, Minister for the Environment. To my right is...
Andy Skates, Chief Officer for Infrastructure and Environment.
And...
Andrew Marks, Head of Development and Land.
Thank you. And we'll start with general CSP delivery and general questions. In what ways does your departmental budget contribute directly to the delivery of the 13 common strategic policy priorities?
Well, I think the budget was not particularly affected by the CSP, and I'm just looking for my notes specifically on the budget. Andy, you might be able to help there, but my recollection is that business as usual policy, we obviously did a lot of work on affordable housing. We put money into rented dwelling licenses, but we didn't have a specific fund for either of those. And when it came to energy strategy, yes, we had some money from the CSP to do the Climate Emergency Fund, CEF, for wind. But the energy strategy, which is going to follow, will be in-house and business as usual. And I don't envisage at this point in time asking for additional money. In any case, if I was to ask for additional money, it would probably be to try to fund some additional staff. And certainly, as you will well know, we are on a recruitment freeze, no consultants and all that type of thing. So if in alongside an additional funding request would have to come a specific application for additional consultants, and that's quite, not impossible, but difficult to know. I don't know if you've got any more comments on budget, but it didn't really affect us too much.
No, I'd agree. I think some of the CSP priorities we are doing within existing resources. So certainly the work we do on affordable housing, especially in the rented sector, certainly gets covered within our regulation directorate budgets. Planning reform, similar within regulation. So they're two examples of where our existing funds have, I guess, stretched across those areas.
From my understanding, when the common strategic policy was agreed, your department said, whatever we agreed in common strategic policy, you need to find the funds within your budget. How you deliver the common strategic policy priorities.
Yeah, I have to say, Chair, that thinking back to the agreement on the CSP priorities, I took a very naive view that actually whether the work I particularly wanted to do didn't necessarily need to be an CSP priority, because it was work I would do in-house as part of business as usual. Later in the day, it transpired that actually the CSP priorities were the absolute priorities, and that compromised me a little because I felt I hadn't made enough of a strong case for many of the things I wanted to do, but just hadn't felt necessary to put on the list. Fortunately, we had CSP 13, you'll well remember, which was added to the list, and I'm really grateful it was now, because without that, some of our energy work might not get quite the emphasis it does. No, but at the time we felt we could cope with in-house. I mean, funds are very tight, but of course, since the CSP priorities have been agreed, we've had, as I said, the recruitment freeze, we've had the stop on consultants, and I mean, that alone gave us a few little headaches inside the department, because we had some big pieces of work we were undertaking where we had to let our consultants go and take that work up in-house with officers who had been doing other work, but then took on, and I mean, I'm thinking specifically although there were other cases specifically about wind, for example. We had a 2 or 3 consultants working on that. That work came back into the department and we had to carry on using existing staff.
But even when I'm looking through thank you, Minister, it's actually helpful. When I'm looking through the SSP priorities, one of them, reform the planning service to get Jersey
Yeah.
building, it's within 1 to 12. Have you received extra funding? Because it's not business as usual, it's something that was committed as one of the priorities, and we know that other priorities received extra funding on top of their business as usual.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Andrew will talk to this in a minute, but reforming the planning service was a change in emphasis inside the department. We didn't engage any new people to do that. We I don't know, how did we transform it? We just said, right, we're going to all knuckle down, we're going to work really hard, try to clear the backlog, we're going to improve our service by offering a proper pre-application advice service. The staff are going to work really hard to clear the number of applications in-house, and we're going to all talk to each other and see if we can't get some consistency and coherency going. And you know, it was a hard
Yeah,
slog.
I'd say
The
it
staff
didn't-
worked really hard for 12 months.
Yeah, it didn't
but we're
necessarily
close.
follow that if you were a CSP priority, you would get more funds. We had to look at our existing resources, and was that a reprioritisation or a priority for us to deliver the CSP? So, in short, no, we didn't get additional funds for planning reform, but that was a case of reprioritising our efforts within the department to focus on that.
In this case, thank you. You mentioned that obviously freeze on consultants, that your department specifically needs specific expertise to deliver some of the big pieces of work. It has put some delivery at risk or delayed. Can you tell us the main financial workforce or capacity risks for CSP delivery in your area, and how you mitigate it and its connected to CSP and the current budget that was presented? What other apart from?
Well, I think the one specific subject that I would cite myself, which was potentially my personal number one priority when I came in for this 2-year session, was to get a water strategy written. We had we've had a member of staff, an important member of staff, who's been ill for quite a while, but nevertheless, the resources required within the policy team to undertake the additional work on gas, because we lost our consultants, and a huge amount of additional work on wind, because we lost our consultants, meant that I was faced with some difficult decisions, and eventually I had to come to the point where I said, right, I will not move ahead with water strategy from the state's perspective, government perspective. Jersey Water are doing a 5-year strategy. We'll have a good look at that when it comes out. But it did mean there was a big, as I said, my number one priority when I came into office, I wanted a comprehensive water strategy for the island by the time we came to the election. I've had to put that on hold. That work will get picked up in the future. But I guess that's probably for myself one of the main implications, one of the main things that came out of the consultancy freeze.
Any other areas that you declared as your when you stood for the minister that you needed to reprioritise?
Well, in some cases, it wasn't necessarily a reprioritisation of the work. It was for me to agree that the output would be delayed. And I think for wind, for example, I had hoped initially to go to the Assembly much sooner. And I think there's been a number of pieces of work which we've had to push back in order for the existing staff to have time to cope with all the additional work they had to take on because of the consultancy freeze. We've also had a few posts which during the 2 years were still vacant, but I think actually some of the, certainly in policy, I think the team is just about up to full speed. And I think another part, certainly in planning, we've got a few gaps, but we filled some senior roles, and one of the reasons we've been able to improve the output of the department is we managed to get some proper help for Andrew here in particular, we've taken on a manager for compliance, and we've also taken on a manager for planning specifically. Andrew was doing his job and those two other jobs for the first 12 months of being with us.
Almost
So
24.
he's a little bit more relaxed than he was.
Okay, yeah, I'll hand to Deputy Dublin.
So I'd like to ask, as a result of all of these changes that you've had to make, going back to the carbon neutral roadmap, has that resulted in any change to the ambition to deliver net zero emissions by 2050?
No, I think I can confidently say that there hasn't been any change because of the consultancy fees. Officers in that specific area have maintained their level of work. We've got a number of initiatives that we still want to put on the table. We're having discussions with Jersey Electricity about the price of electricity moving forward and how we can work with them and the industry to deliver many of our aspirations. But as regards carbon neutral, I think my team, as I'm thinking, working my way through them, were there at the start and they're still there now. And I think we're pretty much delivering on the aspirations as we said we would. We're hoping to get really stuck in properly to an energy strategy in the very near future, certainly by the beginning of next year. And we've had a slight change of date, but of course we have next year in order to deliver that by the end of the year, and I'm confident we can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had some questions about your ability to influence funding allocations and what the challenges you've had with the CSP priorities, but I think you've articulated them very well. And with the benefit of hindsight, do you think that narrowing the focus to this kind of 13 priorities has worked?
Possibly, and I guess the smaller the number you would have, the more emphasis you would have to give to the smaller number, and maybe there's more chance that you'd get them all done. I think from my own perspective, as I said, I think I was a little bit naive at the time, and maybe a greater understanding of what the CSB priorities meant, as opposed to general priorities within a department or general priorities that a particular minister came into office wanting to focus on. For example, as I just said, my personal number one priority was water strategy. I didn't even think to put it on the list because I just presumed I would be carrying on with it as business as usual anyway.
It's interesting because I know we've talked in the States before as well about the consultancy freeze and the recruitment, the consultancy ban, if you like, and the recruitment freeze. Between now and the kind of next election, how are you going to kind of unbung these areas? Because you've clearly got the funding to do some of this work. What is it, what is it that is actually preventing you from breaking through that consultancy ban and the recruitment freeze?
Well, that would be a question for, I suppose, the wider Council of Ministers, Chief Minister, Treasury Minister, and the leadership team within the civil service.
I think we don't ban all consultancy work, so there are still some consultancy works that are agreed. Sometimes if that's technical work that we actually don't have capacity in-house, there's a number of examples of that, or it's tied to our risk profile. So if it's a tier 1 risk for government, we have to get work done, then that's a conversation we can have. We can also have a conversation around how long that consultancy is around for. So it's not an ongoing over many years type consultancy. It may well be a few months, and with a furlough period effectively in there as well. So there are ways through the system, but I think the blanket we'll just get a consultant in to answer the question has gone. We've now got, I think, greater tests now on, does this deliver against a government risk? Is it time limited? Do we actually not have any of this technical expertise in-house? Those sort of questions can get applied.
Because I know you talk about technical expertise in-house. That's very much about capability. So you may well have the capability in-house, but if you haven't got the capacity, you could be waiting years for these things.
Well, I mean, I can give you one specific example, which will be close to your own heart, which will be the West of Ireland Planning Framework. And I don't think it was ever the department's intention to do that piece of work ourselves. And normally for quite a specific, and you need a special level of understanding to do that type of policy work. we would commission that in, and the consultants would come in, they would do all the interviews and a lot of the early work, and then hand it back to the department for delivery and what have you. So there's an example there, but I'm thinking to some others which are much bigger than a West of Ireland planning framework, where we will definitely need lots of help, which is the effects of Brexit. And we know that as the UK and the EU move into this reset, where we need to open our borders and hopefully become, trade becomes a lot easier. In order to do that, we have to make sure that the island's set up with all our laws in place, which make us equivocal to both the EU and the UK. And in the past, we haven't done that. We've certainly applied them, but we haven't actually had the law set in stone. And I know in the Environment Department, for example, we have got a massive amount of work that's going to include a huge amount of time for law officers, law drafters, and I think we'll probably need some very specific help with that, which is going to be expensive.
So will that elevate itself onto the risk register, which will attract the ability for you to be able to recruit consultants for that?
I think the quick answer is
I mean,
yes.
what I'm hearing is
it
that's the
definitely
only
has.
mechanism. The only mechanism you seem to have is
Yeah.
if something is sufficient a priority in your department, you have to get it onto the risk register.
Yeah, risk register, or if I look at it, it may not be so relevant to environment portfolio, but if we've got a structural assessment to make, if there's a building or things like that, some of that resource we do have in house, some we don't. So I guess there's a question of do we have any ability to say no to this work? If the answer to that is no, it's emergency, we have to do it. That gets it up onto the risk register. If it's about a technical assessment, do you have the funds to do it as well? So I guess it's multi-part equation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If we're already speaking about the risk register, Deputy Tadia, would you like to ask a question? Maybe there is a delay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. This is a slightly niche question, I suppose, Minister. It's about the community risk register. So in case of any big events or pandemics that affect the wider community, are there allocations to your department that have been informed by the community risk register? And could you tell us what the key risks would be relevant to your area?
Well, I have to say, I'm not aware of any funds that have been put specifically into my department for risk register work, if you want to put it like that. We are a department which raises quite a bit of money through fees and licenses and stuff like that. We don't actually get a very large cheque from the Treasurer, for want of a better phrase, at the beginning of the year. I think it's only £7-8 million, something like that. Yeah. I don't think it's very great. So we do rely very heavily on income from fees and licenses, and in many cases we'd like to look at the possibility of creating some new fees in certain areas where we know we're providing services where just about everywhere else would charge, and in some cases we'd like to look at increasing the level of fees. But again, that has been a priority for this Council of Ministers, to not put up anything over 2.5%, and knowing that even 2.5% doesn't quite get to RPI or cost of living. So we've been very tight and hard on our not only our expenditure, but also about the amount of money that we want to take from the population. And the result of that is we're tight on budget. And, we do what we can, but it becomes increasingly difficult to do everything.
If I can follow up, then I suppose the question to ask is if there were a disaster of some kind, so if there were another pandemic next week, or if there was a big flood, or there was some other unintended, unforeseen event that fell to your department to do something about, how well resourced would you be, and what would your plan of action be?
Well, I think it would be clear my plan of action would be to walk up the corridor and speak to either the Chief Minister or the Treasury Minister, because I am conscious I do not have a spare penny in my department. There's things I'd like to be doing, people I'd like to employ. A lot of work I would like to get, and I think everybody's the same. We all would like to do more than we can. But certainly when it comes to funds for emergency work, we have no contingency. in the department, and I think we would be going to the treasurer.
Yeah, I think if it helps to sort of maybe outline some of the risks, the wider community risks the department faces. Clearly, there are, I guess, there's incident response risks, so around regulatory, building safety, those sort of things, pollution risks that if something happens, the team has to mobilise. We do also, I guess, we're the frontline responder for sort of pest and animal disease outbreaks, and also within our environmental health, public health function, sort of community health outbreaks. So they're the sort of risks that we mainly carry within the department. The first job generally will be reprioritising staff, because if it's an emergency, some of your BAU work just has to be paused, and you can redeploy people into that. However, that will only go so far if obviously we are incurring longer term costs because of an outbreak response, if I can use that, depending on whether it be animals or pests or whatever that may be. That might then need further resources and that's a conversation we'd have with Treasury.
I mean, if you think back to the start of the last pandemic, I think over half the staff in planning went over to work on
I remember
pandemic
this.
because the government felt that everybody would stop building. And actually what happened was they all sat at home and put in planning applications. So when we came out of the pandemic, the department were faced with hundreds and hundreds of applications in the in-house, which we, to be fair, we struggled to get on top of for quite a while. There was a lot of work to do afterwards.
I remember there is lots of environmental nuisance and other things came to the department, it was actually increased.
So Andy mentions, we are, the most southerly outpost of British Isles, and we monitor health and disease on animals very, very closely. I mean, we see blue tongue. We've recently had a blue tongue vaccination program on the island. We haven't said a lot about it. We managed to fund that in-house just about. The dairy farmers are very pleased about that, but other diseases like I'm trying to think, lumpy skin disease, which sounds exactly what it says on the tin. It's been slowly, last week they've got 3 outbreaks in Brittany. So things like that we've got to monitor really closely. If we had let's hope we don't, but if we ever had a foot and mouth disease in Jersey, I think we would immediately be going down the corridor and saying we need more help. We're going to need more veterinary help. We'll need some infrastructure help.
Okay.
Is this just diseases that occur in animals?
Sorry?
Is this just diseases that occur in animals, or are you talking about
we
population?
monitor all animals, obviously, because so avian flu is one that we'll monitor, but diseases of cattle are particularly important to the island because our island herd is so important to us.
Yeah.
So we monitor very closely foot and mouth disease, we monitor blue tongue, lumpy skin disease, and there's probably 2 or 3 others, but our vets on a weekly basis are making sure and we've seen these, some of these are spread by mosquitoes and insects. And as the temperatures are slowly increasing, these diseases are moving up from the Mediterranean up through Europe, and eventually they get to us, and because it's particularly important to the UK, because we're into the UK very quickly.
Thank you, but you mentioned community health outbreaks. Is that's related
So
to?
we do clearly animal health sits with us on all things. Generally, diseases affecting all animals as well as plants and pests. So other we keep an eye on outbreaks or we don't want certain pests in the island either, mainly insects and things like that. But so that's a potential risk. There's certainly a crossover into human health related to insects and whatever they may be and what they can do to you. Our public health function, our environmental health officers, I would describe them, they're sort of the foot soldiers for public health as well. So if you have, say, a salmonella outbreak or those sort of things, certainly in COVID, that's where we firstly centred our contact tracing functions. So we do cross into some of those public health functions and liaise with our public health colleagues who are in health.
And has that had, your tight budget, has that had an impact on this area of community health outbreaks?
I haven't seen anything, but you'll have to say a lot of this stuff is dealt with in-house, and my management team, my chief officers and my senior officers will reprioritise at the start of the week if there's something specific that needs to be done. It's all businesses. Some of the low-level stuff and general planning is business as usual, really.
If you get a big community outbreak, I think we would struggle if it goes beyond a certain number of cases, and if you have to contract trace a lot of people and so on and so forth. But we do have an in-house resource within our environmental health. Our we call it environmental consumer protection. But yeah, if it goes beyond sort of a small scale BAU bit of business, then
Okay.
we would need help.
Let's,
We recently said, for example, in rented dwellings, there was a number of things, no, actually it was to do with permits and licences, where we said, you know, there was a question about to one of the officers about the amount of resource and time they had to check on the way people are being treated in work. And he was quite clear. He said, at the moment, my small team concentrates on making sure that the qualifications and the paperwork certificates which are produced with a permit application are actually all, they're not frauds, because he said at the moment there seems to be a huge amount of fraudulent paperwork going on. And he said, my team at the moment are not actually getting into on the coalface and getting out and checking, because they're spending a lot of time looking at other aspects. So as much as we'd like to, I think in all those sorts of departments, staff have to be where the priority is.
And I guess that there's, I guess it.
just a minute, yeah. Yes.
Sorry, can I'm just to finish off this area of questioning, can I just ask, I've been concerned from the opening, Minister, that you basically said that you're already on a tight budget, and it seems to me that there are two types of budget in front of us. For some departments, we've got growth budgets. We look at health and education. For many departments, is it fair to say that your allocation is effectively an austerity budget, and that you would like to have had more money for staffing if possible, so that we can try and understand what areas perhaps of potential work are at risk of not being done in the next term of office? I think that's an area of interest, really.
I think that would probably be a fair observation. We're not a department which has benefited from growth money, and we have, as I said, we've made a few applications to try to increase the amount of money we have in the department to use and spend. But money is very tight, and the priority has been given to health and to education and to certain parts of home affairs, where we've got some firefighting things that we've done. And you know, despite my best intentions, and I try as hard as I can, I accept that environment doesn't always sit very close to the top of the list, and we all try our best, but we have to accept that, you know, health is really important, and maybe that's where it should go. But I'm not sure I would use the word austerity, but it's been made very clear we are not to do certain things, and that means our budget is quite fixed and challenging.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Minister, as you know, we're looking forward to, on the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, having a budget hearing with you, I think, next week. So we do want to talk more about your role as almost the environmental lead within the Council of Ministers when it comes to the Common Strategic Policy, and we'll keep our questioning to the CSP. And the panel will obviously have its questions for you next week. But I was interested to hear your comments about Priority 13 in particular, which is about the climate emergency and the carbon neutral roadmap. And it'd be good to understand what the impact of having the climate emergency and the carbon neutral roadmap as a common strategic priority has been during 2025. And whether there's a apart from the energy strategy, which I'd like to touch on later, what kind of what's the tangible impact of having it as a CSP in the last year been?
I'm not sure that I would actually say that there's been a tangible difference, but what it has allowed us to do, obviously, is to point to the CSP list and say, look, energy is a priority. It's one that we need to get on with, and it's one we can't ignore, because if you're going to go down the road of saying the only thing is the CSP and other stuff falls away, well, it's on the list and it's there and it needs to be taken notice of. So we have prioritised our work very much this last 12 months on wind, and I know wind is only a very small part of the energy sector, but we decided we wanted to do the wind work before we got on to starting in earnest the energy strategy. And obviously we're continuing to do good work with trying to reduce carbon. We've had a successful scheme for replacing petrol and diesel vehicles with electric. We continue to fund the home heating changes to try to get away from carbon boilers. And we are also continuing to subsidise the installation of chargers in homes for charging vehicles. We hope to do more. We've got a lot of work going on in that sector, as you would expect, as a priority, and there's work on gas, there's work on all sorts of things. Andy's talking about leases for the fuel farm. I think there's a general agreement that, of course, we will need a fuel farm for the next couple of decades at least, in one way, shape or form. But certainly the inclusion of energy on the CSP list, which is your specific, I don't think it's allowed us to continue to work at the same pace as we would like to without, I think is probably the best way to put it. But, it hasn't resulted in any additional money. Fortunately for us, we have a carbon emergency fund, which has been very useful in this regard because that fund is funding much of this work. We've made an application to increase the charges for vehicle emissions coming into the island, which has been accepted in the budget, and we'll talk about that. We had some other ideas about trying to go even further. I'm trying to think what they were off the top of my head on vehicles. Oh yes, fuel duty. We had proposed maybe some further increases, but those didn't go through. We're just going to stick with the 9p, and that will be.
And this is where my question was going, partly because one of the challenges you have is the balance between fighting for kind of the representation of priority 13 and your environmental hat and the priorities about keeping fees and charges low. And to what extent have you been able to leverage the agreement by the Assembly that addressing the climate emergency in the carbon neutral roadmap, which requires funding and which you have a fund for and need money put into the fund? I'm trying to get into the success, and was having it here any help? Because you clearly weren't able to get across aspirations on fuel duty, for example.
Well, I mean, it's difficult. We have £23 million in the fund, and that sounds like a lot, but it's not going to scratch the surface of trying to do a proper job of getting towards zero. But that's for the future. The financial strategy that we will need to fund carbon is still to be done, and that's a piece of work we haven't got round to yet, but we'll need to do that soon. As I said, I've managed to get some increases in VED. I would have liked more on fuel duty. That wasn't accepted. We had a chat around council and ministers about that. We've maintained the 9p. It's impossible to say if energy hadn't been number 13 on the CSP list, whether the 9p would have been maintained. Maybe somebody came, I can't say. Yeah. But you'd find it difficult to make a case to say that specifically on those areas, fuel duty and vehicle emissions, that the addition of energy as number 13 made a great deal of difference.
Okay. Moving to kind of some of the wider ones, and I know other panel members will touch on, but ones outside of where we might go. For example, reducing red tape in business and affordable homes. To what extent have you, around the Council of Ministers table, been advocating for environmental considerations within these CSP areas? Because again, like keeping fees low or reducing barriers to business, there is an inherent tension. And to what extent have you contributed a voice around the Council of Ministers table, in essence as representative of the environment and environmental sustainability?
I think it would be fair to say, and minutes may well reflect this, that in environmental matters, quite often recently, I have not necessarily been a lone voice, but certainly a voice in leading the minority, in as much as in some areas we are, and I sort of alluded to this, 10, 15 minutes ago, sometimes people have to make a choice between between funding and the environment or health or education and stuff like that. And it's tough trying to push the environmental agenda. And I don't know that there's very much more I can say other than that. In some cases, I will be putting forward an environmental case and people will say, yes, we agree with you and that's right and you should be doing that. But there's always a but at the end of the sentence, it's coming and but I think in this instance we need to think about our determination not to increase the cost of living, or our determination to not increase the amount of money the states are spending or reduce expenditure here. And, life in politics is always a balance, isn't it? A balance of policies, and environmental policies, it's been difficult to promote them successfully because there's so many other challenges. It's tough out there. We don't have enough money to do what we want, and we have to make priorities.
Do you think environment is becoming the poor relation in the way that infrastructure was the poor relation, and when times got tight, the money always came away from the infrastructure budget because it's not short term, it's medium or long term?
Well, I don't know that infrastructures would probably still feel they are still the poor relation, because
But
they
historically they have been the poor
Yeah.
relation, which is what has got us to this position,
Yeah,
whereby now you need
could,
that investment.
I think you can look at, there's a number of places you could look for this, but there's no question in my mind that if you look more globally and you see the effects that President Trump has had on wind energy, for example, or drilling for oil and stuff like that, there's definitely been a step back in recent months around the globe away from environmental initiatives to try to help our carbon emissions and address climate change. And that's been very unfortunate, because it just has a ripple effect which goes on and on and on. We've seen that with car production, take up of electric vehicles, and all sorts of things like that. And it does make the environment, promoting the environmental case more challenging. I mean, we've always seen this with, and I use the example of organic vegetables because in my previous life I was a grower, and we always knew when times are good, people would pay more for organic vegetables because it's a healthier option. But we equally knew when times became bad or tough, the first thing that would suffer would be organic vegetables. People would revert to a cheaper option, which was conventional production. And I think it's a little bit like that with environment at the moment, whereby there's other priorities making it difficult.
I think the fact, going back to the previous question about having a CSP, does mean that it's still on the agenda. Environmental behaviour, environmental knowledge and education, climate reduction, carbon reduction, all of those things. If it wasn't in the CSP, we'd run the risk of it being deprioritised and defunded, I guess. So the fact is we have been able to keep it alive, and there is still a debate to be had. I guess there's the big debate. It's not growing, but it is at least still there within government thinking. And some of the environmental work we do is effectively embedded in other things: planning guidance, planning decisions, building bylaws. Those sort of things inherently have environmental parts to them. Location of development, parking standards, all of those things are part of the environmental debate. So we keep it alive in that sense in terms of day-to-day decisions. But in terms of
I mentioned the
decisions,
£23 million, it won't go very far. But the way we maintain that money at the moment is, fuel duty, VED. And the statistics on the amount of fuel, liquid fuel that's sold in Jersey it's been slowly falling year on year for a number of years now. That will continue, and of course we will get to a point, hopefully not too distant future, where we will transition away from petrol and diesel vehicles to electric, and that in itself, there won't be VED coming in on those to the department, because the vehicles won't be imported to have the VED on. So we do need to address the way that we're going to fund the the climate emergency fund, and that is going to be hopefully a discussion we can have soon with Treasury around the replacement for fuel duty, because the hope is that there won't be a lot of fuel being sold to have a duty on, and at that point we will need a replacement policy.
Thank you. We're going to move on to an area you touched, which is energy strategy, and it felt like the fact that Priority 13 was included almost provides an anchor for the fact that the energy strategy can have a focus and can be a meaningful piece of work to be delivered. So in that sense, could you perhaps expand on, since the approval of P11, how that energy strategy is now playing part of your work stream in 2025 and where it will go, as it kind of ties in, as you said, to...
Okay, well, but I think the best thing to say is that obviously P11 came along after we'd set out our stall. We've only had 2 years to do our work, and that was going to be challenging enough, and then P11 arrived and we agreed, yes, we would do it. I think we always knew it would be something which would come mainly next year. It needs to be delivered by the end of next year. And because of I've already outlined the workload on officers, meant that we couldn't do everything at once. It would have been nice to have started sooner. But we will shortly be concluding the work on wind, which will allow some officers in the department to move immediately over to energy strategy. The conclusion of wind will obviously inform the strategy. We'll be looking at oil, of liquids, gas, sustainable energy, all those sorts of things. But it's a vital piece of work. But yeah, I think the challenges within the department the last 12 months have meant that we haven't really got stuck into it yet. But our intention is to start. It'll be for the next government to agree, but it's certainly going to be for us to start it.
And to what extent, given the short time, will other CSP priorities be able to play into the energy strategy? So whether it be providing more affordable homes or meeting lower energy costs. It is, again, just to tie this to the CSP, is the whole government view of where it's directing able to feed into this strategy to ensure it's not siloed and that it actually delivers not just for priority 13, but for the wider government agenda? So is that part of the scope to look at energy affordability, to look at other parts of, or even reforming the planning service around where energy provision is? Is this something that can be sufficiently holistic around the wider agenda?
Well, I mean, Andrew might want to talk briefly to the review of building standards, which we're undertaking at the moment, and that will make our houses even more energy efficient and more insulated. But my own view would be that I think what we're doing currently within the planning and building world isn't necessarily going to make too much of a difference, because our standards are already good. They will get a little bit better, but it's not the new homes that are burning the energy that we are. It's the the stock of housing which needs to be addressed. There's another island plan coming down the line in a couple of years. That will be an important document to address that. But of course, I get back to the VUD and the carbon emissions. We know the area of the island where we emit the most carbon is in transport. So that's where we're going to have to continue to put a lot of work. But do you want to talk very briefly about energy and efficiency?
Yes, thank you, Minister. The building standards review is progressing really well, and we're hoping to have reviewed all the relevant standards by the end of this year. We have been talking extensively to industry, but also our colleagues in natural environment and the Cabinet Office to make sure that we deliver on these strategies in terms of what's called the boiler ban, or making sure that we come up with better ways of heating homes, and also making sure that people can't, without coming to see us, convert their boilers back into fuel-burning boilers. I know industry is keen to get this going, and we've had quite a few applications. I know my colleagues in natural environment for assistance with heat pumps and things like that. So that's really positive. That will all be delivered, I think, by the end of this political
Thank you.
Can I pick up on something that you mentioned, Minister? Are you planning to relax the planning limitations on listed buildings to allow homeowners to make them more energy efficient?
Well, that would be very presumptuous, because there's an election to be held before then, and then there will be an election for Environment Minister. But if by some remote chance I was here in 2 years' time, I think I personally, and I've said it before, I think there's a piece of work to be done before we agree the next island plan to actually make a decision between listed buildings over here, saving carbon over here. There are lots of things you can do in historic buildings to save energy, but I think we need to go into further detail, and it is increasingly challenging sometimes where properties have old historic single pane windows to try to keep the energy in. Mm-hmm. Personally, I live in such a property. We've got internal shutters everywhere. They work incredibly well, but that's not the only, there's so much energy that has to be put in to help to heat old buildings. It's not always easy. And I just think the next island plan will hopefully steer a course for us there, because we need to be a bit clearer about where we're going.
Thank you.
I'm done with the CSP.
Thank you. About going to aging population, age blue.
I declare I'm conflicted because I'm old. I'll let somebody else to answer those questions.
Okay, I have some quite specific questions. questions around the age-friendly infrastructure framework. So, Minister, what role are you playing in delivering this framework, and how is this work aligned with the CSP's commitment to prepare for demographic change?
Okay, I can say that obviously I was quite involved when the proposition first came, or the amendment first came to the Assembly, and we had all sorts of discussions went on. I think the decision was, of course, you know, we were going to move forward, and it was going to go back to the Council of Ministers. I can't recollect it going back, and in as much as I think the decision is yet to be decided as to whether it's going to be myself or the Infrastructure Minister who will take this work forward. Certainly for myself, not that I don't want to do it, but it would appear to me that a lot of the changes we spoke about during that proposition, our infrastructure changes to do with, you know, levels and step frees and bus stops and access and such. So I feel that it probably will be the Infrastructure Minister, but that work is yet to be undertaken.
Okay, because I was going to ask about progress towards the July 2026 deadline, but there isn't progress then.
I don't think you could say specific progress, but of course every time, well, I mean, Andy could well talk to more of it, but what I would say was certainly things like bus stops and stuff like that. Every time a new bus stop goes in, I'm sure that those thoughts are, you know, are there. I know we had a lot of discussion around the 10-minute transit travel time, and that was quite important. And I think again, that's an infrastructure one, trying to get these new developments that are close enough to amenities.
I think so. With the strategy coming scheduled, I think next year, there's a lot of, I would say, just our business as usual within the environment portfolio, which contribute to dealing with an ageing population. Whether that be if I start with sort of building and design standards, you know, things that we are permitting and allowing to happen, but need to be accessible. They need to be in the right locations. So some of the, firstly starting with planning guidance, island plan, building bylaws, there's inherently in some of those decisions, age and design standards, accessibility, means of access, egress, etc. come to the fore. Even indeed around energy use and energy efficiency helps with homes either being cool or heated. I think some of the other work we do, certainly around the housing standards area, rented dwellings, for instance, the health and safety rented dwellings law is specifically about making rented dwellings safe. So, you know, that there is an element of that which is absolutely relevant to the ageing population in terms of slip, trips and falls within rented dwellings as an example. So some of the work the department does may not necessarily say, here's our strategy, but some of the work we do within environment sort of, it's inherent within it that we look after the ageing population as well as other sections of the community.
Yeah, so although I assume there's no delivery plan in place for this yet.
Well, I think that, I don't know how many times, well, we haven't said this too often yet, but I think that's another piece of work which is going to be taken up in earnest during the PERDA period. And I think it's a good opportunity for a lot of the stuff that's going to be delivered later next year to not necessarily be delayed, if you like, but we've got a huge amount of work to get through between now and the end of March. And the moment we go into PERDA, obviously the input from the people around the table here and others will just drop off the edge of the cliff, and civil servants will have the opportunity then to say, right, we've got a couple of months here, we can start to get stuck into this work. And I think ageing population work is one of those. But as Andy said, a lot of the stuff is already sort of being done. A lot of it will be up, but it's all practical infrastructure delivery things. I don't know that there's a huge amount of ageing population policy to do. Maybe, you know, it's not like reams and reams. We've just got to implement the stuff that we've agreed in the proposition about surfaces and network public shelters and armrests and things like that.
So but clearly there are considerations in place when anything's happening around the ageing population. Just the last thing I'll ask about this then is, because it crosses so much into infrastructure as well, does that make it more difficult to keep this as a priority?
It may well do. I mean, Andy can speak
Yeah.
for the infrastructure department and or the minister himself, but I mean, you've already got a phenomenal list of things you're
Yeah,
trying to do without
I think they're
the money.
complementary roles, really. You know, a lot of the standards, the policy is set, if you like, within the environment portfolio. Certainly, if you look at location of development, standards for new buildings, whether they be commercial or residential. The infrastructure team often is the delivery department that complies then with the standards that are being set elsewhere. So I do think they're complementary. And I guess it's a bit like the environmental agenda as a whole. We need to think about this inherently in all of our work, because if our population is changing, you just need to take that into account.
I mean, we do have an opportunity. We're doing some work on planning reform, and we're out to consultation at the moment for the first stage of changes to the permitted development, the GDO, General Development Order. And I expect to make some changes this side of Christmas on some very straightforward and easy stuff. But we will do further work to that between now and the end of March, and it may be that there's an opportunity to look at some of the work that we need to do for ageing population, to see whether that might be included as permitted development in that second review, which will happen after the new year.
That's good.
Thank you. That's good.
Thank you. Number 11 on the CSP priorities is about delivering a plan to revitalise town.
Yep.
Can you just tell us what collaboration has taken place between you as Environment Minister and your colleagues in infrastructure, economy and housing to ensure coordinated delivery of the plan?
Well, it's very much an infrastructure plan, but certainly I have high-level discussions. The difficulty for a planning minister or planning officers is that we can't ever get too much down into the detail, because what we don't want to be doing is to be judged during execution. Now, we can set some general guidance about this is what type of thing we'd like to see, but when it comes to the very specifics, it's up to the applicant, whether that's the infrastructure department or a commercial businessman or something, to make an application to our department to be determined. So we have to tread this tightrope between the two to make sure we don't put too much detail into the guidance, because we can't be seen to be trying to design the scheme ourselves and then have it given to us to decide whether it's acceptable or not.
So what environmental standards and sustainability goals are being applied to the revitalisation projects in town?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not conscious that there's anything that's sustainability, revitalisation. Certainly, Andy's been my chief officer previously, and I know we've discussed ways that we can improve walking and cycling, green areas, amenity areas in town. We've talked about cycle routes, pedestrian routes. So I think there's always a desire to revitalise. But as we know, these schemes, Broad Street and King Street, they're not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. We've got aspirations for Central Market, Fish Market and other areas. But again, that's priority work inside infrastructure, and I guess it will be part of the infrastructure minister's
Let's just go
list.
no, it's helpful. Thank you.
Just a quick one. Will the plan to revitalise town be safe and accessible for children and those with disabilities?
Well, I think that is all part of the work I was talking about, where when you come to new developments, there's a number of considerations now that we might not have thought about quite so much previously. There's green spaces, there's amenity space, there's bike parking, there's bin storage, there's storage generally, and children play areas are vital to that as well. And I think we are seeing increasingly more movement towards thoughts of children's amenity areas, and it's great.
Can I clarify? I don't just mean discrete areas for children. I mean the town as a whole to be safe and accessible for children, like a child-friendly town.
I can't think of a specific policy or anything that says that. I mean, obviously we try to do our best, but that's a challenge. I mean, anyone who has small children tries to take them around town knows how difficult that is.
So certainly, in new public realm schemes or sort of highway schemes, there'd be road safety audits, those sort of things. It's not just children focused. It'll be road safety audits for all. But I don't think we definitely don't have a specific wheel design plan for children. I guess the starting point for Plan for Town sits with the island plan. I think under the minister, we've been able to sort of, I guess, visualise that in a tool, a visual tool showing everybody where developments are going to be taking place. The vast majority of investment in town is not public investment, so there's a lot of private development. So using appropriate planning obligation agreements to capture planning gain or improvements around them is also really important as part of that. But I think that the key at the moment is that decision-making tool as to what's going on, what development sites have we got alive, if you like, and then when we are planning public realm schemes, they are generally planned for all. So I would say it's probably covered in there, but maybe we need to be a bit more obvious about that.
I would have
Is
thought
there
for
a formal
myself,
governance structure for the town revitalisation work?
well, there's a regeneration
Working
steering group
group.
which was set up, which I don't sit on, but was set up specifically to look at major infrastructure in St Helier. It's since broadened its aspirations to outside of St Helier as well. But generally, that was the group of people who would sit
But
on these.
as Minister for Environment, you don't sit on the
I don't
regeneration
sit on the
steering
RSG,
group.
no.
Okay, that's surprising.
Yes.
But can I just get back to Louise's
Sorry.
point very, very quickly about children? And to me, the safety for children and safety for pedestrians in town is to separate pedestrians and vehicles, because that is the most challenging, if you like. So the more pedestrianisation we can get, even if it's much wider pavements or small lanes that are closed or whatever, the more we can link up areas where people can feel much safer from not having to share roads with vehicles, because some of our pavements are really not very wide.
Could I just quickly ask on your role within delivery of a plan to revitalise town? You've mentioned guidance, and there's a wide amount of guidance that dictates how town should be developed already. To what extent are you encouraging ministers who have ambition to engage with your department, with your policy officers, about what's actually deliverable? Because part of having a plan to revitalise town is deliverability. And if schemes were to come forward which weren't in line with established guidance, then it wouldn't be deliverable. So how much are you championing early engagement with officers who know what the kind of the parameters for development are in town? And we discussed La Folly as an example in the Assembly last week. But of course, there's a force and other wider schemes where early advice might change whether something's realistic or not.
I think I'd just go back to the general, one of the general points about planning reform, which is we very much want people to engage with us before they put an application in, whether that's a private, whether that's a corporate, whether that's a government department. The planning team now are very much set up for pre-app engagement, so people can come to us with an idea and say, this is what we generally like to do. Can you give us some advice? How can we work with you as we develop this application into more detail? And that must go for government departments as well as everything else. But I accept in certain instances, politicians sometimes have great ideas, and it may well be that some of these ideas come out in the media or what have you before there's too much discussion.
So given that, are you making it clear to ministers that the best way perhaps to achieve a plan to revitalise town is early engagement? And are you kind of constantly banging that drum that deliverability requires early engagement?
I can't put my hand on my heart and say that I am. I can't put my hand on my heart and say I've been overly included in a lot of the plans to revitalise town. But then sometimes there's reason for that. And if the departments are going to the planning team and Andrew for some advice, that would be really the way to do it. As you will know, when it comes to specific applications, I'm usually the last person in the line for making a determination. So quite often things don't come near me.
About revitalised town, does harbour and waterfront are included in the guidelines for revitalised town? I tell you why I'm asking, because during the public hearing for Public Accounts Committee, we've been told that there is no joint vision between two state-owned entities to develop. So harbour develop according to the vision of the ports, and the waterfront develop according to the visions.
Yeah, I mean,
Do we have joint guidelines for that area?
I'll be very brief, but I have said this before. I mean, when we incorporated harbours, for example, they took over a certain amount of line when we had a red line that went round. And, never shall we go over the red line, never shall they come back over the red line. And especially when you throw in SOJDC with another big chunk of land alongside, and then you get into greater town area where you've got St Helier, you've got the Constable, you've got the States of Jersey, and I think we could go back and look to do a better job of that red line to make it much more blurred and maybe have a much better arrangement where we could chop and change so that the line could maybe move here and adjust it over here. I think it's made life difficult for all of us really to move forward, and it would have been, it's easy for me to say, but it would have been,
Understand.
I think we could go back and start again with a lot more collaboration between ports and SOGC and government. And the blurring of the line, I think we might have had more joined up thinking.
They are key parts of town. So I think the quick and honest answer is they need to be part of the plan for town.
Okay, thank you. For planning?
Well, and very quickly, and I'm sure our panel will pick up on it because I know we're at time. One thing about the planning reform as the 12th CSP is to enable sustainable development in Jersey. And to what extent, given this, the title of this was changed by the Assembly to represent sustainable development, not to get Jersey building, have you been able to ensure that the Assembly-driven mandate of this CSP is what's being reflected in planning reform?
Well, I guess the very short answer that is, one might try to do your best in that area, but we have to look wider, and currently development and construction is really difficult. You'll know we've got sites all over the place which are either got applications that have been passed that are not getting demolished, or they've been demolished, they're not being redeveloped. And we are doing sustainable development where we can, but wouldn't it be nice to have a really buzzy construction industry at the moment where we could do a lot more input on the sustainable aspects of the development? I think the challenge at the moment is
Are they not mutually compatible, that you can
Well, they are. I
have
think the
a
point I'm
sustainable
making is
construction
you can't
industry as
have-
part of sustainable
You
development?
can't have sustainable development if you don't have development, full stop. And at the moment, I think that the difficulty we face is the price of money, the price of construction materials, and is tough.
And kind of 18 months on from when this was agreed, do you think all your ministers agree and understand what this priority means and what their obligations are when it comes to agreeing that the Assembly agreed this is the priority and what sustainable development means? Or are you still communicating that to them?
I think I might just fall back on what I said previously, that when times are tough, the sustainable, the environmental, the organic, or whatever you want to call it, those aspects reduce in priority, reduce in importance, because there's more important things that we have to get over the line: health, education, and a load of other stuff as well.
Coming back to what you said, and I'm looking at the CSP, we have sustainable well-being as a whole in Future Jersey Vision, and sustainable well-being including community well-being, economic well-being, and environmental well-being. As a Council of Ministers, have you got this balance right between three parts of the sustainable well-being, and how much environmental well-being was waived and compared to other parts of the sustainable well-being?
Well, I mean, in some aspects, I think we are making some progress. We've spoken about the revitalisation of town, and some of that work is getting done. That's environmental well-being, if you like. But I think ministers all have their own priorities within their own departments, and how much sustainable well-being or environmental well-being, ageing population well-being. It's a lot to think about, and I think ministers will probably tend to concentrate on their specific bit, if you like, rather than the whole thing.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the panel? Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.